On this edition of Independent Sources, insecure communities. Community organizations in New York press Governor Cuomo to opt out of a controversial immigration program.
Stop the presses. Why is press freedom in several parts of the world on the decline?
And Russian roulette. A Russian journalist stripped of his citizenship and harassed by the secret police for his reporting.
Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre.
And I'm Vianora Vinca. When Illinois Governor Pat Quinn notified Immigration and Customs Enforcement that his state was opting out of the Secure Communities program, he set off ripples across the country. His action is now emboldening community groups here in New York to ask Governor Cuomo to opt out of the program.
Secure Communities has been a major part of the Obama administration's immigration policy. It allows local police officials to check the immigration status of anyone they detain. The problem is, the dragnet originally meant to snare high-level criminals is getting regular people deported.
I sat down with Renée Feltz, who has been covering the issue, and Michelle Fay, who works with one of the organizations lobbying Governor Cuomo. We talked about this groundswell of protest and the controversy surrounding the program. Renée, Michelle, thanks for coming in today. I'd like to start the conversation with a look at an anti-secure communities rally staged on the one-year anniversary of New York's adoption of the program.
We're here today to talk about the injustice of an ICE program called Secure Communities that are making our communities more insecure.
At first glance, Secure Communities may seem like a harmless program, but make no mistake about it. Secure Communities is anything but harmless. Under Secure Communities, thousands of New Yorkers will end up in detention and deportation after coming in contact with local police.
What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now.
I had a young man who came to my office. He had been arrested on a manslaughter charge. Within 2 months, the district attorney realized that he had the wrong person, and he was exonerated of actually having committed the crime. However, because he was on Rikers Island while he was awaiting that exoneration, ICE was able to interview him. Here was a guy who was doing absolutely nothing wrong, trying to do the right thing, attending college. He was brought here when he was about 4 or 5 years old by his parents. He had no choice in coming to this country, but now found himself imprisoned for over 2 years for having done absolutely nothing wrong. And that's why this policy is unjust.
1 year ago today, when Governor Patterson signed the agreement to bring ESCOM to our state, nobody was told. This was something that Governor Patterson did in secret. Our police didn't know, our elected officials didn't know, and we didn't know. What we need is for Governor Cuomo to completely stop the agreement, to end all kinds of collaborations with ICE, and to keep all New Yorkers safe.
We need everyone to contact Governor Cuomo's office today asking him to terminate this program. Pull out your cell phones, people. I have the phone number.
Michelle, has Governor Cuomo been responsive to your organization's call to opt out of the program?
Well, Governor Cuomo has been in conversations with us since he first came into office. And when he was running for governor, he had let us know that there were concerns about ESCOM and that the state should not be doing the federal government's work. To this day, though, all we know is that he's still considering the program. But we do hope that he makes a decision to get New York out of ESCOM as soon as possible.
And are you getting more organizations and legislators to sign on petitions for the state to?
Yeah, we have a petition that had gone live, and we have, I think, more than 5,000 signatures now. On our working group, we have more than 80 organizations that have signed on. And before the rally, we had 38 legislators send a letter to Governor Cuomo asking him to stop the ESCOM agreement.
And also the week before that rally that we saw on TV just now, we had a vigil that was led by religious leaders also calling on Cuomo. And all of this is coming on the heels of a lot of action across the country, including Illinois pulling out of ESCOM, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus asking for a moratorium, and Zoe Lofgren calling for an investigation. And so we feel like there's a lot of momentum right now, and Governor Cuomo really needs to take advantage of this window of opportunity.
Renee, do you get a sense that there's more pressure on Governor Cuomo right now to opt out of the program due to Illinois governor's decision?
It could be taken that way. I think there's also pressure at the federal level for the governor to reconsider this program. Essentially, state, federal lawmakers are saying Secure Communities has a mandate to try to do what it describes, create secure communities, but instead it's actually taking people who've committed no crimes or low-level offenders out of communities, separating them from their families. And the question has to be, does Governor Cuomo want to participate in a program that's been identified as not working properly, that's essentially broken, or does he want to opt out?
I spoke with you, Michelle, earlier, and you believe that Governor Patterson was actually misled into signing onto this program. Talk about that.
Yeah, there are actually a lot of documents that have been released through through a public records request, and these are ICE documents that clearly indicate that there was a lot of deception going on to get New York to sign on to ESCOM. For ICE, New York is kind of the golden egg. We have such a huge concentration of immigrants that it was really important for them to sign New York onto the agreement. And there are a lot of documents that lay out their strategies very specifically to New York. And there have been revelations, even as recently as last week, that the contractor who was in charge of getting New York to sign on lied about the voluntariness of the program, and that he was instructed to lie about it by top officials at ICE.
And generally speaking, when some governments attempted to leave the program, they were met with resistance from the DHS, and ultimately they were refused to be granted to leave the program. Renee, will Illinois be able to remain defiant of the program?
I don't think it's over yet in Illinois, and I think other governors will learn from the experience of Governor Quinn there, and they might try different strategies. Essentially, what governors are being asked to do is to participate in a program that's been identified as not working properly. And these governors are saying, we don't want to be part of an ongoing experiment. If anything, we want to put the program on hold until it's fixed, and whether or not it can be fixed remains an open question.
And just to build on Renee's point, I think it's very important for states besides Illinois to really show their resistance to ESCOM. So it's true, it's not quite clear right now what will come out of Illinois actually trying to terminate the agreement, but the agreement has very express language about the ability to terminate at any time or to suspend the agreement at any time. And ICE's response has been to Illinois that even though Illinois is trying to pull out, that they're just going to go forward anyway. But their response is not that it's legally impossible for Illinois to get out of that contract. And I think that's what other states have to really focus on, because I think it's really important for President Obama to see, too, that there's an upswell of resistance and anger about this program, and we all need to kind of step up and follow Illinois' example right now.
And one other point to add to that is that it's not just the resistance is not just coming from the state governors, but there's also legislation at the state level in Illinois and in California where the states are considering different ways to let counties opt out of secure communities if ICE forces the state to participate.
And the arguments against it are, of course, all people without being criminally convicted, being deported, and also the local police are citing budgetary issues. How relevant do you think those are in this context?
They're extremely relevant, and I think the third argument that should be raised here in terms of the concerns that people have about secure communities being implemented when it's not clear if it's working properly or will be able to work properly is that this is a program called Secure Communities, and yet it's been documented that immigrants are fearful of going to police for help if they think that those police can then detain them once they have an initial interaction, and they may never see their families again. Instead, they'll go to the police for help and end up detained and eventually deported. So there's a public safety concern. There's a concern among local police officers saying, we already have a lot on our plate, we're already dealing with budget restrictions, and now you want us to take on additional responsibilities. There's even been a concern raised that police who are diverted to having their attention paid towards immigration enforcement are no longer responding to 911 calls, for example, very quickly. So, there's a lot of public safety concerns that I think are being raised at the local level that are worth looking at, and that impact everyone in the community, as well as immigrants who are directly affected.
I think it's also important to not lose sight of the main criticism of ESCOM, which is really that it's a dragnet to try to pull in as many immigrants as possible and to throw them into a deportation system that we all know is completely broken and unfair. And so I think we really kind of need to look at also the fact that this is really just a program to deport as many immigrants as possible.
And with this program and alongside with other deportation programs, the Obama administration has recorded the highest level of deportations higher than under the Bush administration.
That's exactly right. It's really disappointing that this is the way that Obama has chosen to go. And that's why also here in New York, it's very important for us to highlight the fact that it's not just the fact that innocent people or low-level offenders get deported through ESCOM. Even people with criminal convictions, we feel, deserve a chance to stay here in with their families and communities, because one of the things that ESCOM does is completely subvert the criminal justice system. It forces immigrants to not be able to qualify for the same kinds of relief and programs that non-immigrants are able to qualify for, and at the same time is really, as Renee said, jeopardizing our public safety, really amplifying racial profiling, and not letting the criminal justice speak for itself. When immigrants go through the criminal justice system, they, like everybody else, come out after the criminal justice system feels like they've already been meted out a fair sentence, and deportation is an unfair second punishment.
Michelle Fay and Renée Feltz, thank you for being in studio with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on independent sources, press freedom at an all-time low in many parts of the world.
Before that, Jessica Courtemanche has some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. El Diario La Prensa reports that members and employees of the Peninsula Public Library in Far Rockaway protested budget cuts recently proposed by Mayor Michael Bloomberg. About 50 demonstrators gathered in an effort to save the jobs of 471 workers. Young students from the area also joined the protest, saying they would no longer have access to educational materials like books and computers. Mayor Bloomberg proposes to cut $25 million from the budget for the public libraries in Queens for the 2012 fiscal year. This would mean that 48 libraries would be closing 4 to 5 days a week. From the Indian Express, immigrant rights advocates decry the lack of due process in the deportation system. The Vera Institute of Justice published statistics that show the unjust consequences of immigration detention for those fighting deportation. Families for Freedom is a New York-based multi-ethnic defense network for immigrants. They've long criticized the system, saying that it detains hundreds of thousands of people annually and often sends them to jail facilities in Texas, Louisiana, or other faraway locations. Amsterdam News reports that a new homeless center opened in the Bronx. The Prevention Assistance and Temporary Housing Facility is a center for homeless families seeking shelter. The facility is more than 75,000 square feet. It houses more than 200 specialists and has the capacity to process about 120 families per day. Construction on the center began in October 2007 and cost $65.5 million to complete. From the Irish Central, the Irish Technology Leadership Group recently launched a New York chapter. The Consul General of Ireland in New York hosted a breakfast to celebrate the occasion, which is a milestone in the organization's goal to promote technology connections between Ireland and Silicon Valley. Back to Garry and Vianora in the studio.
Thanks, Jessica. The human rights organization Freedom House recently reported that press freedoms around the world were at a 5-year low. The most pronounced setbacks were seen in Latin America.
I spoke with the author of the report, Karlekar, and Javier Sierra, who has also researched the issue. We looked at this trend and some other issues raised about the state of the world's press. So Karin, is the world more or less dangerous for journalists?
I would say more dangerous. We've seen in the last decade or so that according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, they've been cataloging more journalist deaths every year. And so I would say in general it is more dangerous. The other thing that accompanies the deaths of journalists is the increasing issue of impunity. So cases where journalists are killed, harassed, things like that, most of those cases are not being investigated. And the fact that there aren't proper investigations and that people aren't prosecuted means that others feel more free to kill, murder, and harass journalists and know that they can get away with it. So it's the two things go together, but I would say it's more dangerous and the impunity is leading to more murders as well.
Okay. Javier, how much is the social media phenomenon driving force behind this? Because information is so readily available right now. We saw in the Middle East and North Africa how much of a role that Facebook and Twitter played. And so do you think that these despots are more likely to be more repressive now that information is so readily available?
Of course they are. There are many examples throughout the world where you can see that the effect of the internet has both have a very positive effect in the way we communicate with each other and to make information available to the largest possible number of people. But at the same time, we see that many regimes around the world that are very scared of this freedom that the internet brings to all of us. And I can name you two of them. The most notorious one, of course, is China. The other one is Burma. China possesses the most sophisticated censorship apparatus in the history of the world. It's called the China, the firewall of China. This is such an incredible means of censorship that it can control what everything is said and written by 450 million internet users. Yes, the internet has been a double-edged sword here.
Well, Karin, there's a lot of information out there. What role is sort of like traditional media playing and to ensure that social media information is as accurate as possible?
Well, I think that's one of the issues because, as you said, there's much more information, but a lot of it is not being produced by, professional journalists. So you can have bloggers, you can have citizen journalists, people who write more opinion than fact. A lot of that is entering the news environment. And so you do have much more information, but I think there still is a role for more traditional professional news outlets in providing sort of high quality news, particularly also investigative journalism and very in-depth pieces, and also sort of international coverage. That's one thing that the bigger news outlets have specialized in. I would also say though that a lot of these traditional news outlets, both print and broadcast, are really employing social media now. So they're getting reports from citizen bloggers on CNN. The New York Times is using Twitter and Facebook. So I think there is a symbiotic relationship between the two, and there are a lot of ways in which mainstream outlets can make use of these new tools. But I think there still is a role for this more traditional professional journalism.
Well, Javier, this report is a little bit of a downer for our profession. Are there any good news that came out from that report?
Well, Karin is the one who should know much better than anyone else on this planet about this project. This is her baby, and there are a few good pieces of information there, and there's a few countries where we've seen that there's been progress. Some of the countries of the former Soviet Union, but on the I don't know, I'm going to talk a little bit about my expertise, which is Latin America. And Latin America, according to the report, has been the region where we've seen the steepest descent in press freedom. I prepared 4 of the reports of 4 countries, and especially Ecuador and Bolivia were notorious in the way that press freedom has been repressed in those. They're supposed to be democracies, but unfortunately they're acting as if they were not.
Well, Karin, since Javier said you're the expert, that's your baby on this, but I looked at the report, and apparently the Eastern European countries are doing quite well. And Africa, can you explain a little bit more what's happening in these two regions and why press freedom is improving?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're looking at sort of regional changes, so looking at a regional level. You're right, parts of the former Soviet Union and Africa showed the biggest improvements this year. And I think there are several things driving the change. A few of the countries really experienced sort of really broad political opening or reform.
You're talking about now Eastern Europe?
Well, both.
Soviet,
yeah,
both?
one is Moldova in the former Soviet Union, and in Africa, both Guinea and Niger. Okay. So those three countries really saw huge levels of improvement in press freedom, but that was tied to broader political change. Okay. In smaller cases of positive change, I would say in both places, actually, it was driven by sort of legal and regulatory improvements. So in the former Soviet Union, there were some improvements in Georgia and Kyrgyzstan. In Africa, we saw actually Liberia pass a freedom of information law last year, which was a big, positive step. There was constitutional reform in Kenya, and in Zimbabwe, which is a very, very closed media environment. They finally did register some independent daily newspapers.
Well, they have had a lot of problems in Zimbabwe.
Yes, quite a lot.
Javier, I want to talk to you a little bit about Hugo Chavez. What's happening in Venezuela? Is it improving there?
Not really. The problem with Venezuela is that the media and the government are in this tug of war. Any person, the media, any media outlet that actually criticizes the government is taken completely out of context and is considered an enemy of the state. When you have that kind of confrontational relationship between the two, nothing good can come out of that one. What Chavez has done throughout these years is that he's used the excuse that some of the media, independent media, actually supported the attempted coup that almost ended his government. And every time that there's a confrontation with the media, he brings that up. So you you actually supported a coup by a foreign power, the United States, to get me out of the way, even though I was elected democratically. So that is his the way he deals with the media. And also, there's been a lot of laws and that have been passed by Congress that is actually controlled by the Chavez government that have been extremely detrimental to press freedom in Venezuela. The problem with Venezuela is that this kind of confrontational relationship is spilling over, and it's going to other countries like Ecuador, Bolivia, even Argentina. We're seeing that there's this very confrontational attitude between the state and the media. And as I said before, this is extremely toxic in terms for the public to stay informed, to remain informed about matters of public interest.
So now, what is your conclusion? What do you recommend? How do we get improvement? What levers of power do you have to improve the conditions?
Well, it's interesting because we see that in some ways the media environment is really opening up and improving in some cases, and that there is, I would say, more vibrancy in the media. But at the same time, what we see is then governments are cracking down and there are more threats in terms of murders, in terms of legal cases. So it's definitely a bit of positive and a bit of negative that we see every year. One thing that we really noticed this year, though, is that as we talked about some of these positive changes, a lot of them were driven by sort of legal improvements, laws being passed. So I think attention by both local press freedom activists and, foreign donor agencies to sort of help push these positive regulatory and legal changes along is very, very important. And sometimes it doesn't happen over 1 year, but it really takes a long-term sustained effort. So providing U.S. and European donor support for some of these initiatives and for media development programs and training for journalists, I think is one of the main ways that we can see sort of long-term sustained improvements in a lot of these countries.
Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Karin, Karlekar, Javier Sierra, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
When we come back, exile and intrigue as one Russian reporter fights to tell the truth during the Second Chechen War.
Do your part. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank today.
And finally tonight, journalists under fire. Things got so bad at one point for Yuri Bagrov that he was forced to adopt his biological son after the Russian government took away his passport and stripped him of his citizenship.
Bagrov was one of the few independent journalists who reported on the Second Chechen War using his own byline. That bravery cost him his country and nearly his life.
После сначала второй военной кампании в Чечне на Северный Кавказ приехали многие ведущие журналисты, репортеры со всего мира, и это событие привлекло большое внимание. Среди этих журналистов были мои друзья, и я просто в силу случая оказался втянут в орбиту журналистики, потому что первое время мои функции были лишь административные. Но позже я втянулся и стал работать журналистом.
Каждый день эти горы обстреливают из тяжелых орудий и бомбит авиация. Два села Карамахи и Чебан-Махи отчаянно сопротивляются.
И так как я работал на западные СМИ, я мог говорить о тех темах, которых умалчивали мои коллеги из российских СМИ. И в силу того, что я был местный, я знал больше деталей, у меня было больше возможностей узнать о каких-то вещах и об этом рассказать, чем у приезжающих моих коллег из Москвы. На тот момент об этом еще никто не говорил. Похищение людей началось примерно за полгода, месяцев за 5 до того момента, как вышла моя статья на Associated Press о похищении людей. И эта тема не была известна московским журналистам, не была известна западным журналистам. Почему вызвало столь раздражение? Да потому что у меня были доказательства того, что к похищению причастны сотрудники российских спецслужб, в частности ФСБ. Когда утром звонок в дверь, и я спросил, кто там, мне ответил, участковый. Я открываю дверь, заходит 10 человек, показывают мне санкцию суда на обыск и приступают к обыску моей квартиры, причем не дали возможности изначально даже там одеться ни мне, ни моей жене. Это было очень нервное время, и несколько раз звонили, например, моей жене и просили, когда меня не было дома, вдову Багрову к телефону. И она там в панике перезванивала мне, с тобой все в порядке или нет. Я здесь не мог находиться под таким пристальным наблюдением, как находился в России. Но в России у меня оставалась мама, оставалась сестра, и я очень боялся, что мои выступления на пресс-конференциях и в Вашингтоне, и здесь, в Нью-Йорке и так далее, могут навредить моей маме, по крайней мере, которая оставалась на тот момент во Владикавказе. Вот. Но я в то же время понимал, что я должен говорить о том, что происходит в России. И мне кажется, я смогу вот этому научить своих коллег на Кавказе, потому что за последние 10 лет с изменением политической ситуации в России, с приходом Владимира Путина в Россию и так далее, просто журналистика разрушилась, была уничтожена как профессия. Потому что сейчас журналист, он воспринимается, в лучшем случае, как официант в ресторане, как какой-то обслуживающий персонал.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Till next time, be independent-minded.